Welcome back to Talking Europe. Coming to you from Brussels. Now, the statistics are as damning as they are grim. 1 in 3 women in the EU, aged 15 or over, has experienced physical or sexual violence, or both. More than half of all women in Europe have been sexually harassed. Now, only a fifth of women, and this might surprise you, in the EU, report it to police when an intimate partner assaults them. It almost bears repeating. Meanwhile, EU member states have failed, to this day, in 2023, to agree on how to address some of the worst crimes against women. Several countries continue to resist calls by Brussels to define non-consensual sex as rape, punishable by a stiff jail sentence. So here we are, 2023, no common set of rules in the EU to punish rape. And that is to really the growing dismay, I can perhaps safe bet say, of my guests today. On my right, MEP from the European People's Party, Irish, Frances Fitzgerald, along with my other guest, Evan Incher from the Socialists and Democrats, Swedish MEP. You two actually came together at a common cause because you're both rapporteurs or rapporteurs on the fight against violence against women and domestic violence. Very important to add, and domestic violence. Let's cut to the chase here, because there was something I just said which might have sort of raised your eyebrows, and that is the fact that today in the EU, 2023, almost 2024, no common set of rules to punish rape. Frances Fitzgerald, how's that possible?
It is shocking, and that's why we are working so hard, Evan and I, on this directive. We want to include rape. We want to include the issue of consent. We're facing huge resistance, including from France, to have it in the directive. And this directive is a unique opportunity to deal with violence against women. It's the first time we've had a directive, which means that if you're a woman in Croatia, Ireland, France, you can be assured that as you travel around, should misfortune befall you, you will have the same understanding in the courts and in the country and get the same protection. And this is the first time that the EU is doing it. The time frame is short, but we're getting a lot of resistance from many member states.
Can we name some names here, Evan Incher? Let's name names. Who are the states that are holding out? What are their various reasons?
Look, there are a lot of different states. France, Germany, my own country, actually, Sweden, until just a couple of weeks ago, didn't say yes to including the consent-based rape legislation within the directive. We have the Netherlands, Portugal, so there are quite significant amount of countries.
Major Western European powers here. And we're talking about this definition, right? The objection in some cases is a legalistic one, right? They're saying it's overreach. Why do we need special EU law when national legislation can deal with rape? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, I mean, the arguments, shall we say, first of all, the motivation isn't there, and I think there's a lot of questions about that. Because if you're really serious about equality, I think you would say that we should have this Europe-wide definition. Secondly, they say it's overreach into the criminal justice laws of particular countries. We say that it is such a serious crime, it's so ubiquitous, you've mentioned the statistics, that we should have it across Europe. And then, of course, they say it's not really sexual exploitation, which is the basis in the treaty that the Commission suggested it would come under, sexual exploitation. Clearly, rape is sexual exploitation, but there's a lack of motivation to agree. And there's many countries, you see, don't have consent in their national law. But if you want to understand rape as we see it, very often a lack of consent is a serious issue and a big part of what happens.
And you know, Amnesty International, Evan Incher, said a few years ago, we're going back, I think, to 2020, they said sex without consent is rape. It is that straightforward. There are no gray areas. And yet, it seems that there are gray areas here, at least legalistically speaking. France would say there's a gray area.
Well, I would say that, I mean, we have from the side of the European Parliament, as well as in the Commission, we have the legal services from both institutions that says that this is actually, it's not only Evan Incher or Frances Fitzgerald who thinks that, but it's the judicial institution of our institution who said that this should be a part of the directive. So there is, according to us, legal basis for it, but there are excuses from some of the member states to include it. And I totally agree with Frances that it is, in the end, about political will. For some it's about political will. For others, they still live in a Stone Age, with the Stone Age mentality. As, for example, the National Conservative government in Hungary and Poland. Hopefully soon a change in Poland. But when you have this kind of governments, you also know that this government will never prioritize women and girls' rights.
So perhaps there's a political element here, political ideological, and also maybe a cultural element. In some countries, there's this culturally embedded notion they're not used to dealing with rape as a crime.
You have to think about how difficult it's been. For example, you think of the Me Too movement and how it opened this vista, this appalling vista. I mean, it's been very difficult for all of our member states to bring forward progressive laws in relation to rape. And it's still very difficult for women to report it. They're very slow. There's far more rape than gets reported, or sexual harassment at work. So you have to be really clear that at a political and policy level, this is a priority for you, and you take it seriously because of the impact it's having at every level in our societies, individually, socially, psychologically, and economically. So we're very disappointed. We'd love to see France, for example, taking a leading role on this, because we know that they're, if you like, their heart's in the right place. They do want to have strong laws, but they don't want this European-wide definition. But it would be so protective of women if we could get France and Germany, a number of other countries, to change their minds. Now, it's a good directive on cyber violence, on female genital mutilation, and other issues. But this is very key for us.
It would seem like one of the top issues. You mentioned France, and I'm wondering, the concept, this is obviously a horrible crime. You don't get worse than murder. The issue of feminicide, that is the category women being murdered, whether by partners or non-partners, whatever. A lot of countries don't have a separate category, right? They report car deaths, regular murders, homicides, but not feminicides. How many countries in the EU right now have a special category for feminicide, women being killed?
I cannot say by heart exactly how many countries, but we know that it's a very, very, very few countries that are even discussing femicide, that so many countries are still opposing a consent-based rape legislation within this directive, shows that we are far away even using the word femicide in many other countries.
They see that as a politically charged term, perhaps?
Definitely, they do.
Yeah, so countries are getting very kind of concerned and over worried, I think, about sort of a word like femicide or, sex and gender. I mean, look, the basic line here is about violence against women. It's about having the same prevention, protection and prosecution across all of our member states. And you talk about femicide. I mean, a city the size of Amsterdam or Zagreb or Marseille disappears every 10 years with the numbers of women.
You said Marseille in there.
Yes.
A city the size of Marseille
disappears off the face of the earth with the numbers of women killed, femicide across the world. So this issue of violence against women, it's not just something a few of us talk about. This is a real social issue. It's a real policy point for governments to take very seriously, top of the agenda. There's a lot on the agendas of prime ministers at the moment. We understand that. But this should be top of their agenda too, because it's impacting on the lives of women in their countries.
A top priority. We also, speaking about agendas right now, the European Union is looking at taking in new members, right? Perhaps up to half a dozen over the next several years. We don't know. A lot of countries in the East, are these issues, violence against women, rape, feminicide, are these part of the accession talks when a country wants to join the EU? Is this one of the chapters they have to meet norms and standards for?
Well, it's fundamental values, isn't it? It's human values. It's the EU values. It's human rights. They have to meet human rights standards. And of course, equality is one of those standards.
Right.
And they have to work towards greater equality. But let me say, it's unfinished in the members that are in the EU already. It's an unfinished democracy as far as we're concerned. And this discussion we're having shows how unfinished it is and how much work we all have to do in relation to equality. People sometimes think, because there are more women being educated and more access to jobs, there's still a lot of misogyny and everyday sexism out there.
And it's an interesting sort of issue because I guess, in some cases they say, well, civil rights, certain countries say we've tackled that. There's no more discrimination or racism in our society. And I guess we could tend to think the same way about women's rights. We think, we've had Me Too, but you're really just beginning. These are early days for Europe.
We are definitely just beginning. It's just the start of it. That we have 5 countries within the European Union that haven't even ratified the Istanbul Convention shows how far away we are from even discussing this or starting to discuss this issue. But I must say, though, that Ukraine, for example, in the middle of this horrific situation that they are in, have ratified it. The Istanbul Convention, which 5 European Union countries has not done.
Speaking of right of priorities here, Ukraine has managed to make that a priority. And the Istanbul Convention, correct me, it was 2014, right, that it came into force. It's the first legally binding treaty that against violence against women and domestic violence. And it's been ratified by the EU, is that correct?
Well, only the EU competence parts have been ratified, so the whole Istanbul Convention have not been ratified. So that's also why it's important to continue putting pressure on those countries who haven't ratified it to ratify that also.
Got it.
And it's the argument France is using, you know, that they will put the Istanbul Convention into their law, which is kind of a general piece about sexual violence, as opposed to going with the particular definition of rape with consent, which we would really urge member states to do.
To do both, yeah.
We've just scratched the surface here, and we're already out of time. But I will say this: November 25th is the International Day for the Prevention of Violence Against Women across the world, not just in Europe. And I think you two are at the forefront right now of making sure that they get on the books a lot of some of those worst crimes against women on an EU level. So I thank you very much for your work. I know you have your work cut out. And I thank all of you for joining us. I've definitely learned something today. I hope you have as well. Thanks for watching Talking Europe.